Hello, I want to welcome you as we begin our journey through the book of Revelation. If you haven't joined us on our journey through the book of Daniel, I would just ask you just to turn this video off and go back and go through all of our presentations that we have on this website about the book of Daniel. Because now we're continuing what Daniel left off. And if you don't understand Daniel, it's going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to understand Revelation. Revelation 11, if you remember, for those of you who were with us, we ended where the king of the north puts his, they called palatial tents or his palace, there in between God and man, and sets it up, but that he will be taken down, never to arise again, with no one to help him. Well, how does that happen? Well, the tables have been set in Daniel, and now we're going to get into Revelation. So I'm glad you're going to join us. Today we're just going to have an introduction. We're going to look at some of the structure of the book of Revelation. And I think you will enjoy that aspect of figuring out how is the book of Revelation structured? What is it all about? And then next presentation we'll actually get into Revelation 1 and we'll begin going through the book of Revelation. Before we start, let's just begin with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity we have to study your word, to study the book of Revelation. I just pray that you will be with us in a special way. May you guide us and direct us. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O God. In Jesus' holy and precious name we pray. Amen. So we're going to start off just by looking at a couple things about the book of Revelation, and you can fill out your worksheet. I'm not going to talk much really in this presentation because you're going to be doing a lot of writing, and I have a purpose in doing that. It's going to be a lot of work for you, but I think that it will be beneficial for you as we go on later into the book of Revelation. But we'll go through a couple first slides, and then I'm just going to put up the slides, and I'm going to be quiet, and you can copy, you can pause the video, you can copy what is on there on the screen, and then that way you will have a base for understanding the structure of the book of Revelation. So who was the author of Revelation? Well, I think most of you know it was John the Apostle. He was he was a beloved disciple of Jesus. In fact, according to his account, the most beloved one. He was probably the youngest of all the disciples. He was called a son of thunder with James, his brother. Came from a good religious family. In fact, Jesus was so close to him, and he used to put his head on Jesus' chest, that he was the one who ended up actually looking after Mary when Jesus was at the cross. He ended up writing the Gospel of John and 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John as well, which reveals some of the deepest truths about who Jesus was, who Jesus is. So John was a very close disciple of Christ, and about 95 AD, he was exiled to Patmos by Domitian. Domitian was the Roman emperor. He was actually a brother to Titus. Titus was the one who had destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. Titus was a charming, very successful emperor. Domitian, not so much. A very dark character, kind of a loser in life, he felt like. People really didn't like him. He kind of had a bad attitude. And because of this, he actually ended up forcing everybody in the whole Roman Empire to worship him as a deity. This was the only way he could get respect. Well, this posed problems for the Christians who would not worship anybody except God. So this was a very difficult time for the church. It was a time of persecution, and many people were either killed or exiled, and John just happened to be one of them who was exiled. And so we read the book of Revelation at the time when John was in exile there on the island of Patmos in the Mediterranean Sea. What is the purpose of Revelation? Well, you don't have to go much further than the first verse. It's to reveal what soon must take place. It's to reveal Jesus Christ and that's why it's called the revelation of Jesus Christ. It's revealing what is going to happen and how is Jesus going to be involved in this? What does it mean for his church? What does it mean for him? How is he going to resolve it in the end? These are the questions the book of Revelation answers, and this was going to be encouragement. Why? Even in John's own time, he was being persecuted. He was on the island of Patmos. He was suffering persecution. So for him to figure out what's going to soon take place, this is a good thing. It's a positive development. What are some of the characteristics of the book of Revelation? Well, first of all, the most probably important one is that it's symbolic. I mean, we have beasts, we have dragons, lampstands, we have all kinds of different symbolisms here. If you don't believe the book of Revelation is symbolic, you can come to some very interesting, fantastic interpretations of the book. So the first thing we have to say is that this is a symbolic book. It's a book that's meant to represent things that are going to happen, different powers that will be actors. So that's probably the most important thing. The second thing we'll say, it's a book of predictions, as we just said. It's predicting what's going to soon take place. It's also a book of songs. There are many songs there. It's a book of blessings. Jesus promises a blessing through it. There are many passages where blessing and God's blessing upon his people is put into context. If you don't understand the Old Testament, it's going to be very difficult to understand Revelation. And I just mentioned before, if you don't understand the book of Daniel, it's almost going to be impossible. But not just Daniel. We need to know the whole Testament. Why is that? One scholar went through and found that out of 404 verses in Revelation, 278 contain material from the Old Testament. That's about 70% of all the texts in Revelation are either quotations of or references to or using the stories or the symbolism or the analogies or the actual objects, for instance, from the Old Testament sanctuary. So 3/4 of the book about is a reference to the Old Testament. So if you don't know the Old Testament, it's going to be very difficult. Now, as we go through this, I'll try to help out those who don't understand the Old Testament. And for those of you who do want an introduction to especially the Old Testament sanctuary service, you can go back and look at one of the first videos I did even before the book of Daniel and look at that. There are actually a couple presentations about the context of the book of Daniel and the Old Testament sanctuary service that would greatly help you in understanding the book of Revelation. So Revelation is also just poetry, beautiful poetry. Now, obviously, when things get translated into other languages, some of the poetry gets lost a little bit, but you can still see the poetry throughout the book of Revelation. Numbers are important in Revelation. We come across numbers like 12, like in the Old Testament, 7, 3, 12 times 12, 144, 1,000, a multitude. So we come across these numbers quite frequently. So again, this is important because many of them are symbolic. Also, and what we're going to talk about, if you were with us in the videos about Daniel, Revelation uses what's called a chiasm. For those of you who weren't, a chiasm is a Hebrew literary device or an Eastern literary device where you have a thought, and we'll call it A1. So it has, put it on the screen there. A1 is a thought about the topic A. Then it goes to thought B1. And then there's another section that's a B2 section that's related to B1 because it's about the topic B. And then the chiasm will actually go back, the structure actually takes us back to A, the topic A, at the end. Now, usually in the West, we go A1, A2, then B1, B2, and that's kind of the logical way of devising our arguments and our papers or whatever we're doing for school or for university. But in the East, it's more poetic, linguistic structure where you go A, B, B, A. So why is that important? Well, you will see on your worksheet, I'm going to put up these slides, and on these slides, you are going to be able to copy down on the slides, on your worksheet, the different aspects of, we'll go through a prologue, then we'll go through the epilogue, and you will see on your worksheet that those are directly across from one another. And then you have the 7 churches We'll go to the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, and the great controversy on the left side of your sheet. The great controversy is the last one. Then we'll jump over and we'll go through the 7 last plagues, which is up 1 on the right side. Then we go back to Fall of Babylon, which is across from the great controversy. And then we go to the millennium. And then we'll go to the New Jerusalem. Now, what I want you to do is fill this all out, and then you can look at your worksheet and discuss in your groups how they go together and what difference that might make. Look at the theme. You might want to write down the theme. There's a theme on each of the slides for each of the different time periods. For instance, we'll go to the first one, the 7 churches. This is where Christ counsels his church, who's at war, scattered in many cities. So right next to the 7 churches, Revelation 1:10 through 3:22, this is where Christ counsels his church. So you can put counsel right there on the worksheet. Then you go to Christ shields his afflicted people. So I hope this makes sense. I will put the slides up. I will not talk. You can copy them. And then at the end of the presentation, you can actually talk in your groups of how this structure can make a difference in how you understand the book of Revelation. So you can now go through and fill out your worksheets and then discuss it in your groups. And next time, we'll get into Revelation chapter 1. May God bless you.